and welcome everybody. I want to start this talk with a question. Who of you had ever the pleasure of starting a new project from the scratch? Okay, some of you, almost everyone. So in this case, you know, it is really a nice thing to start something new from the scratch. At the first day, it looks like this. You have this green field and everything is okay, and you have the imagination that everything is possible now. And after some weeks, it looks like this. It is very cute, a prototype. It does exactly what it is supposed to do. But after some years, it looks like this here. And no, this is not me at college. This is the Frankenstein monster. I suppose you know him. This monster that has been assembled of parts of different dead people. And this is exactly what your software will look like, because you're adding one use case after the other use case. You will add one technology after the other technology. And of course, somehow we need to prevent this, and this is what this talk is about. In this talk, I will give you 3 solutions to provide or to prevent the Frankenstein monster. The first solution is using npm-Packages. The second solution is going with the Monorepository. And the third solution is using microapps. And then at the end, I will give you some guidance upon how to choose the right solution for your current needs. But first, let me also introduce myself. I am Manfred. I'm a trainer and consultant. I live in Austria, and I do a lot of assignments also in Germany and other parts of Europe. And I'm focusing on Angular. That is what I'm doing nowadays. I'm helping companies with trainings and with in-house consultancy. I'm also part of the Google Developer Expert team and of the Angular tooling team. My current product, of course, is also around Angular. It's a workshop for Angular in the enterprise, and it is a public workshop in some cities, and it is also available as an in-house workshop in whole Europe. Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about the first approach I want to show you to prevent the Frankenstein syndrome. The first approach is about using packages, npm-Packages, and the idea here is to subdivide our whole big system into a lot of tiny, less complex, more testable parts. And for this, I have a good message. We can immediately getting started with this by leveraging the CLI. Beginning with CLI 6, we have a solution on board, a solution that allows us to compile an npm package out of our project. It is really too simple to be true, because everything you need to do is to new up a project, and after this you can create a library within this project. For instance, here I'm creating a flight booking library. You can also create other libraries or other applications. For instance, I like to create a playground application that allows me to test my library. It gives me some test code for the living documentation. And then you can serve your playground application to make sure everything runs smoothly. And after that, you can build your library. And this is making sure that all the conventions are respected you need to align with to create a package for Angular. After this, you can move into your distribution folder, and then, of course, you can publish everything, for instance, at your local npm repository. For this, you will point to it using the registry switch. There are other alternatives to publish your package to a specific registry. For instance, you can set the default registry on a machine-wide basis, or you can use some configuration files within your project. And from the perspective of a software architect, this has a lot of advantages. One advantage of using and distributing libraries is that you have a clear defined way to share code, to distribute codes to your customers. And another advantage is you're getting versioning. That means every time you publish your library, you assign a new version. And so the consumer can decide upon whether to go with the current version or with an older version, for instance, because of some reasons that deal with compatibility. Those are the advantages, but there are also some disadvantages, and you will find those disadvantages on the next slide. You will find them here. So, as you see here, all those advantages are also disadvantages at the same time. Let me elaborate on this. For instance, when it comes to distribution, it is a disadvantage because using packages for distributing source code within one project is just annoying. Just think about what that means. That means that you first have the role of the library developer, you are wearing his or her hat, and you are developing a library. You are testing the library, you are assigning a new version, and then you will publish the library. And then you are switching roles. You are wearing the hat of the application developer, you are npm installing the library, you are integrating the library, and of course you will find out, hey, this library has a bug. And so one more time you have to switch the role, you are wearing the hat of the library developer again, you have to fix the bug, you have to assign a new version, you have to publish everything. As you see here, this is just a mess, it is just annoying. And in general, you want to prevent this within one project. Using packages is the right thing for sharing code with other projects, like we have seen before. But when it comes to subdivide one big project into tinier parts, you need something more. When we talk about versioning, it's also a disadvantage because versioning means you can have old versions out there. And old versions means you can have version conflicts. Angular 5 here, Angular 7 there, and boom, hell breaks loose. And somehow you want to force everyone within your team to use the latest versions of all your software parts, of all the things you and your colleagues have written. And for this you need some solution. That means we need something on top of packages to compensate all those disadvantages. And this leads me to the second approach I want to tell you about today. This leads me to the monorepo approach. As we have heard before in the last talk, a monorepo is just a folder that contains a lot of projects belonging together. Here I have my projects folder, and it contains a flight administration application, a flight API, a flight application, and a validation library. That means I'm just subdividing everything into tiny parts, and all those parts are placed here in this folder. The best thing about using a monorepo workspace is this node modules folder here. Not the fact that it is there, but the fact that it is there just once. You just have to go with one and only one node modules folder. And that means that everyone is automatically using the latest versions of all your libraries. The latest versions, or let's say the same versions at least, of Angular, the same version of react.js, the same version of Redux, and so on and so forth. No version conflicts anymore. This also has further advantages. One further advantage is that everyone is using the newest parts of the other sub-projects because the other sub-projects are co-located with your own code. You just have to point to /project name, and so you can reference the other parts. You don't end up with version conflicts because everyone is using the same node modules, and we don't have the burden with distributing libraries. We don't have to assign a new version number. We don't have to publish something. We just check it in the source control, and everyone else will get our pieces of code. Creating a new library is really a piece of cake. It is just about adding a new folder, so it is too easy to be true. And there is a lot of experience out there. For instance, people at Google and people at Facebook are using this approach for years quite heavily. But also the Microsoft community is using this approach since about 2 decades. Who is using .NET? Some of you. In this case, you know the term solution. In this case, you know the term .NET or Visual Studio solution. A solution in Visual Studio is nothing else than a big folder that contains a lot of projects belonging together, so you could call it a monorepo. Also, when you know Eclipse, who knows Eclipse? Some of you, okay. Eclipse has this notation of a workspace, and a workspace is also something that is quite similar. The best thing about monorepos is it is not a one-way street. You can move back and forth all the time. So let's assume we have written this monorepo, and now this validation library is really major. Other people of our company want to have this validation library. So we could easily take this validation library and put it into an npm registry, for instance, Vardaccio, as we have heard before. And so all the other people can leverage this validation library. By the way, this is exactly how Angular is developed. Angular is developed within a monorepo, and when they want to provide a new version, they just publish everything to npm. And this makes sure that Angular forms in the version 7 plays together with Angular common in the version 7, and that this works together with Angular router in the version 7. Everything is developed together and then published at GitHub using, not at GitHub, at npm, using a common version number. So if you say, hey, yeah, I like what Manfred is telling me, I like this idea of the monorepo, then I want to encourage you to look into NX. NX is the novel extensions for Angular, or as I call it, the sugar dip on top of the CLI. It enhances your CLI, and it gives your CLI new tracks. It gives your CLI new commands and new possibilities, and those possibilities are quite in handy when it comes to managing a big software product within a monorepo. One of the things it does is displaying everything, all your projects and your libraries as a graph. You can look at it and you can find out whether everything is communicating with everything else. In general, you want to prevent this situation. In general, you don't want that everything is connected with everything else, because this leads to a software that is hard to change. You can also define rules that tells the NX toolkit which library is allowed to access which other library, and then you can test against those rules using the linter. For instance, when here my local library would access the flight application, it would be a situation that would not be beneficial. You don't want that a very common local library is directly accessing a use case specific library like the flight API here. Okay, so using monorepos, using NX, using the CLI allows us to subdivide a big project into tinier parts. Tinier parts that can be distributed quite easily, and you don't end up with version conflicts. Those are the advantages, but there are also disadvantages, and one more time, you can find them on the next slide. You can find them here. So one more time, it seems like that all those advantages are also disadvantages at the same time. Why are having several sub-projects are disadvantages? Well, normally they are not standing for them alone. Normally they are communicating with each other. And every time you are communicating with the other part of your software, you have a contract. And contracts are hard to change. If you don't believe me, just try to change your renting contract in the next break or your employment contract. It will not be easy at all. You have to discuss, you have to find new solutions, in this case a new API design, and then you have adopt this new idea. That also means you need intermediate solutions, and in some months you will have your solution. So it really takes out a lot of agility. And it becomes even worse when there are several teams involved. For instance, I call it here Team A and Team B, because in this case they have to communicate with each other. Communicate. No, just kidding. Nothing against communication. But this also means that one team can block the other team. And this is also something that takes out a lot of agility. You want to prevent those situations where one team blocks the other team or where you are ending up into a lot of politically motivated discussions. And this also decreases maintainability because that means you cannot change something easily, you cannot change something quickly. And it also means you just have one architecture and just one framework because there is just one overreaching system. And of course, you could try to squeeze in another architecture and another framework, but this would lead to the Frankenstein monster we wanted to prevent. That means in those situations, we need something different, and this leads me to the third approach I want to talk about today. This leads me to the micro apps approach. The idea behind micro apps is simple, and it is quite old. It has been around for 2 decades. The idea is not to write a big system that can do everything, but instead of this, you're writing several tiny systems, several tiny self-contained systems, systems that don't need the other systems to provide some value to the users. This idea is quite modern nowadays. A lot of people are talking about this in the area of backend development. There they are calling it microservices. If you take this idea and if you pull it to the front-end layer, you could talk about micro apps or about micro frontends. But the idea is the same. You have several tiny applications that are just concentrating on a specific kind of use cases. And this, of course, leads to several advantages. You don't have contracts between those self-contained applications, and you can do a separate development, no blocking tasks between teams. You can even do a separate deployment. That means when you are done, just deploy to the server. Your users will download the newest versions of your micro application and they have immediately a value of it. You can mix and match technologies in a sense that each and every micro app can have its own technology stack. The first application can use Angular, the second application can use angular.js, the third application can use vanilla.js. Are there other options? I don't know. I think that's all. And you can mix and match different architectural styles. You can use a Monorepos style for the first application and something completely different for the other application. You can use Redux here and something like Akita there. Of course, this also has one disadvantage. The user is not amused if they have to start 50 tiny applications every morning. And this means we have to provide everything as a common thing to the user. And for providing several micro apps as a common thing to the user, there are several possibilities. The most easy one is going with hyperlinks. If you ask me, hyperlinks are quite a major technology because they have been around for 20 years. And to be honest, I have never ever heard someone to say a bad word about hyperlinks. So it seems to be a good fit here. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, hyperlinks are not the last word on this, but in some situations, just using several tiny single-page applications connected with hyperlinks is the way to go. Especially if you have a product suite like the Google Suite or like Office 365. Let's look at Google. When we look at Google, we have a lot of tiny self-contained applications, for instance, Google Maps. And Google Maps is specialized into one kind of use cases. It is specialized into working with maps and routes. And if you want to use something else, let's say Google Hangouts or Google Docs, you just follow one of the hyperlinks on the right side, and then you are loading a new single-page application. By the way, the most important aspect of the whole presentation can be found on this slide. It is very vital for me. I'm putting a lot of emphasis into it. if you forget everything, please always remember this one aspect, namely in Germany, there is a city called Steierberg. It has my name in it, and it is even written in the right way. Is someone here from Germany? Yeah, I love you people. You are the best. Thank you. Thank you. I really love you. Yeah, this is the most important thing. You can forget about the rest. But now let's proceed with the boring technical stuff. Using hyperlinks has some advantages, and one advantage is it is drop-dead simple. But the disadvantage is you are losing your state when you're transitioning over to another single-page application. And you have to load a completely new application. And this is exactly what we wanted to prevent when we invented single-page applications. The need to load a new page with new JavaScript bundles all the time. And in addition to that, you want to provide a consistent look and feel. For instance, you would want to have here this component within all your applications so that you have a consistent look and feel. And for this, using web components would be quite a good fit, because web components work together with each and every framework, as mentioned before, with angular.js, Angular, and vanilla.js. But sometimes just using hyperlinks is not enough. Sometimes our user deserves something that's better, and in this case you will very likely end up with a shell architecture. A shell is nothing else than a single-page application that is capable of loading other single-page applications on demand. And when you think about something like this, when you think about loading other applications within your applications, then you might come up with this solution here. iframes. I don't know about you, but I'm always getting this strange feeling in the stomach when I'm hearing the word iframe. But to be honest, iframes are not only bad. They have some advantages, and the biggest advantage of an iframe is isolation. Isolation means that the application in the first iframe cannot harm applications in other iframes. A bug here does not influence the functionality there. A destroyed layout here does not influence the layout there, and they cannot hack each other. So iframes seems to be the way to go if you have to integrate third-party vendor applications. But besides this, you need better approaches, and a better approach could be bootstrapping several single-page applications. That means you have one index.html, and within this one index.html, you bootstrap several single-page applications on demand. I think on demand is here quite an important word, because on demand means lazy loading. And in general, you want to do this to speed up the start of your application. Let me show you a demonstration for this. I've prepared a tiny demonstration for this. This here is my application that is nothing else than a shell for micro apps. And for instance, when I'm clicking here, I'm loading an Angular client. It's called my blue Angular client. And when I'm clicking there, I'm loading another Angular client. It's my red Angular client. All those clients are self-contained systems. All those clients are self-contained applications. You could even start them in an standalone mode. And this is a big thing, because that means you can develop it independently, you can test it independently, and you can deploy it independently. And after deploying it, the shell will just load the newest version of your blue client or of your red client. Here I'm just loading those Angular clients into my shell. That means I'm not using iframes. Here I'm bootstrapping several applications within one and the same index.html. Let's also click to payment here. Hey, what's there? I promise you, I don't know this logo. I don't know this logo because I'm an Angular person, but in my point of view, it really shows that you can now mix and match different technologies. And one more time, not because you want to use all the technologies, but because you have to. When you have an evolving piece of software, a piece of software that needs to be maintained and extended for 10 or 20 years, it is beneficial to have the situation where you can come up with a new framework or even with a new architectural style. No one knows what happens in the next years, and so it would be nice if we would be flexible. Let's also click here. Here you see angular.js. Who is still using angular.js? Yeah, some of you. That also means that using micro apps is one way to migrate step by step away from a legacy technology like angular.js or like jQuery or something like this. What you are seeing here is what I'm calling the macro architecture. The macro architecture is what holds together the different micro apps which presents everything as a common thing to the user. Besides this, there's also a microarchitecture. The microarchitecture is the architecture within those micro apps. For instance, when you click here at messages, then you see here that you can reuse widgets from other parts of your system, from other micro apps. Here I'm reusing a widget from my green client, a widget written with vanilla.js, and a widget that comes from my blue Angular client. Sometimes this is important because sometimes different use cases have to play together. Okay, so much for this demonstration. Let's have a look at the advantages of this architectural style. One advantage is you are ending up with several small and decoupled projects that don't belong on each other. They can also be used in standalone mode. And you can establish autarkic teams. Autarkic teams that can do their own development, that can do their own deployment when they think that they are ready. They also can do their own decisions, technology-wise or architectural-wise. And one more time, this is also what the disadvantages are of this architectural style. Because when you have all those things, that also means you have more bundles. Each of those micro apps come with their own bundles. And this also means that you have less optimized bundles and duplicated code. Because each of the Angular micro apps will contain Angular, and each of them will contain Rx.js, and some of them may contain their own copy of Redux and NGRX. So that means it is not as optimized as before anymore. And there is also this drawback regarding UI consistency. Somehow you have to make sure that you provide a common look and feel. As mentioned before, for this you could use web components that can be used with different frameworks. Okay, so much for this. So now let's come to the fourth and last part of this presentation. The fourth part is about choosing the right solution for your current needs. And as I found out, this is quite difficult. I've discussed this with a lot of customers, and I find out that we all of the time run in circles. We run in circles because, let's be true, every one of us just wants to have the advantages of those approaches. No one of us wants to have the disadvantages. But when we buy one of those solutions, we also have to buy one of those disadvantages. And that was the reason why the discussions have been quite difficult. And because of this, after some time, I came up with a decision tree that helps you to find a first fitting architectural candidate. Of course, such a decision tree cannot be the last word on this, but it proved to be in handy several times to identify a first solution to discuss about. Using this decision tree, the first question I would ask you, do you have a lot of shared state? And does the user need to navigate a lot back and forth between the micro apps. And if you say, no, this is not the case at all, then go with hyperlinks. Hyperlinks are the easiest solution for this, and you can even later switch to another solution to integrate everything into a common shell. But in this case, just get started with hyperlinks. If you say, hey, I have a lot of state, and the user is moving a lot back and forth, then the next question is, do you need to integrate legacy applications? Or do you need a very, 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 very strong isolation? You need a very strong isolation when you want to integrate third-party applications. I have some customers that have this very need. They have a very specialized RRB system, and they want to integrate other applications into their specialized RRB system to provide more value for their customers. If you say, yes, I need this isolation and I need to integrate legacy applications, then yeah, you have to go with iframes. I'm very sorry. In this case, iframes are the most fitting solution. Saying this, iframes are not a good fit for public websites. You will very likely not build the next Amazon using iframes, of course. If you say, no, I don't care about legacy, I don't care about isolation, the next question is, do you even need a separate deployment? Do you even need to mix and match technologies? And if you say, yes, I need this, because I have several teams, they want to work in an autarkic way. And if you say, yes, I need this because my software evolves over the next 20 years, then try to bootstrap several single-page applications. As mentioned before, one index HTML, several single-page applications. If you say, hey, I don't need this, I just have one UI team, and they will work on this for 3 years, and then they will switch it into maintenance mode, then go with Monorepos. In this case, the Monorepo style is very likely the best solution for you. So, of course, I'm a very curious person. I want to know what you think about this. Just think about your current project. Who of you thinks that in the current project of you, using hyperlinks would be the way to go? Okay, 1, 2, 3, okay. Who thinks using iframes is the way to go? Let's make a blind vote, because no one wants to say, hey, I want to use iframes. Who is thinking iframes is the way to go? Okay. We will see it on the recording. Who thinks using several single-page applications, bootstrapping them, is the way to go? Some of them, okay. And who would go with Monorepos? Yeah, nice. And who is right? Everyone is right, because it really depends on your needs, it really depends on your solutions and on your architectural goals. If you say, hey, that was a nice talk, I want to read more about this, just check out my blog. This is currently one of my main topics, and so I have blogged a lot about this. And if you say, hey, that was a bad talk, even look at my blog, because I'm writing in a better way. Who knows? So let me come to a conclusion. We have seen we can use packages to provide reusable code. And we have seen we can use the monorepo to structure a big application, to subdivide it into tinier, less complex parts. And we have seen that micro apps allow us to decouple things. They allow us to decouple projects, but also to decouple teams. We can end up with several autarkic teams. For providing packages, you can go with the CLI. For using the monorepo style, you can also use CLI6 or NX, the sugar dip on top of the Angular CLI. And for using micro apps, you have several possibilities. You could go with hyperlinks, you could go with iframes, you could bootstrap several single-page applications. One word before I finish, please take care about this guy here. Please make sure that your next application is not becoming a Frankenstein monster. Here you have all my contact data and all my information about the workshop. I have also published my slides at my website within my blog. And if you need anything, just reach out. And perhaps you want to follow me on Twitter so that we can keep in touch. Thank you for coming and have a nice day.